With tears streaming down his face, Jackson Harrington buried his prize stallion up to its neck in the scorching desert sand, while veterinarians threatened to have him arrested for animal cruelty. 7 days later, the same horse that science had condemned to death galloped across the dunes with renewed strength, forcing modern medicine to confront an ancient truth it couldn't explain. The sun beat down mercilessly on the vast Nevada desert as Jackson Harrington stood motionless, his weathered face set in grim determination. At 62, the renowned horse breeder had built an empire worth millions from nothing but dust and dreams. His sprawling ranch, Golden Horizon, was famous throughout the Southwest for producing champion thoroughbreds that dominated racetracks across the country. But today, none of that mattered. Today, he was about to make the most controversial decision of his life. "Dad, this is insane," pleaded his daughter, Melissa, her voice trembling with emotion. "There are other options. We can get a second opinion, try experimental treatments. Anything but this." Jackson didn't respond. His eyes remained fixed on Thunder, his prized stallion, once magnificent and powerful, now reduced to a skeletal figure barely able to stand. The horse's coat, once gleaming like polished ebony, now hung dull and lifeless over protruding ribs. His eyes, though, those eyes still held the fierce spirit that had captured Jackson's heart 15 years ago. "The vets have all said the same thing," Jackson finally spoke, his voice barely audible over the desert wind. "Progressive equine muscular dystrophy, incurable. They recommend euthanasia to end his suffering. Dr. Wilson, the family's trusted veterinarian for over 20 years, shifted uncomfortably beside them. "I understand your reluctance, Jackson. Thunder is special, but I've consulted with specialists across the country. The disease has progressed too far. He's in pain every moment he stands. So your solution is to put him down." Jackson's voice hardened, his calloused hands clenching into fists. "Like he's just another broken piece of equipment to be discarded." "Dad, that's not fair," Melissa interjected. "Dr. Wilson has always cared about our horses. He's trying to prevent unnecessary suffering." Jackson turned away, his boots kicking up dust as he walked a few paces. The vast desert stretched before him, the heat creating shimmering mirages on the horizon. In the distance, the jagged mountains stood like silent sentinels against the cloudless blue sky. This land had been in his family for 4 generations. Every inch of it held memories, secrets, and traditions that outsiders would never understand. "My grandfather told me stories," he said suddenly, turning back to face them. "Stories about the old ways, the desert healing rituals his father learned from a Navajo healer during the Dust Bowl." "Doctor." Wilson's expression shifted from sympathy to concern. "Jackson, whatever you're thinking." "The sand cure," Jackson continued, ignoring the interruption. "For horses with muscle ailments, they would partially bury them in the hot desert sand, letting the heat and pressure work through the muscles while massaging and treating them with herbs." "That's ancient folklore," Dr. Wilson protested. "There's no scientific basis. My grandfather saved his best stallion that way after 3 vets said he was beyond help," Jackson cut in sharply. "That horse went on to sire a bloodline that built this ranch." Melissa stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on her father's arm. At 35, she had inherited his stubbornness along with his keen business mind. As Golden Horizon's financial director, she dealt in facts and figures, not folklore and faith. "Dad, even if there's some truth to these stories, you can't just bury Thunder in the sand and expect a miracle. He needs professional care, pain management, not desert mysticism." "I've made my decision," Jackson said firmly, the lines around his eyes deepening. "I'm taking Thunder to the eastern dunes. There's a spot where the sand has the right minerals, where the temperature is perfect, My grandfather marked it on our family maps. This is madness, Dr. Wilson exclaimed. As Thunder's veterinarian, I cannot condone this. It's potentially cruel. And if he dies out there, if he dies trying something that might save him, at least he dies with dignity, fighting for his life, Jackson retorted. Not from a needle because we gave up on him. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by Thunder's labored breathing as he stood trembling nearby, supported by two ranch hands who looked as uncomfortable as everyone else. I'll report this, Dr. Wilson finally said, his professional demeanor cracking. The Animal Welfare Board will do nothing because I own this land and Thunder is my horse, Jackson interrupted. You can leave now, Doctor. Your services won't be needed. As Dr. Wilson stormed to his truck, Melissa stayed, torn between loyalty to her father and her own rational doubts. Dad, please, she tried one last time, think about what you're doing. Thunder could suffer even more out there. Jackson looked at his daughter, his eyes softening slightly. Do you remember what my father told us before he died? Trust the land that fed you. This land has answers modern medicine doesn't. I feel it in my bones. He turned to the ranch hands. Prepare the trailer, minimal supplies, just water, some feed, and my camping gear. We leave in an hour. As the men moved to follow his orders, Jackson approached Thunder, gently stroking the stallion's neck. One last ride, old friend, he whispered. One last chance. Melissa watched, a sense of dread filling her chest as she realized nothing would change her father's mind. The desert had always been in his blood, calling to him in ways she'd never understood. Now it was calling him again, offering an impossible hope that science and medicine couldn't provide. And Jackson Harrington, stubborn to his core, was answering that call, willing to risk everything on an ancient remedy and the unforgiving mercy of the Nevada desert. The old pickup truck crawled through the desert, pulling a horse trailer that groaned with each bump and dip in the barely visible trail. Jackson drove with grim focus, his eyes occasionally flicking to the rearview mirror where he could see Thunder's dark silhouette swaying with the motion. Beside him, Melissa sat in tense silence, having insisted on coming despite her misgivings. We're almost there, Jackson announced as the truck crested a small rise. Below them stretched a valley of golden sand dunes, their rippled surfaces glowing amber in the late afternoon sun. See those rock formations to the east. My grandfather called them the sleeping giants. The healing sands are just beyond. Melissa squinted through the dusty windshield. And it looks like every other patch of desert we've passed for the last 2 hours. That's because you're looking with your eyes, not your instincts, Jackson replied, a hint of impatience coloring his words. This place is special. The sand here contains minerals from an ancient seabed. There's iron, magnesium, selenium, elements you won't find in ordinary desert sand. Did Grandpa actually explain the science, or is this more folklore? Melissa asked, unable to keep the skepticism from her voice. Jackson's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Your grandfather wasn't an educated man by today's standards, but he understood things modern science is only beginning to grasp. He saved horses that veterinarians had given up on. Or maybe those horses would have recovered anyway, and he attributed it to the sand. Jackson shot his daughter a sharp look. You always were too quick to dismiss what you don't understand. Some things can't be explained in your spreadsheets and profit margins. The words hung between them as Jackson guided the truck down the slope and across the valley floor. Finally, he stopped at the base of a particularly large dune, its crest rising like a golden wave against the deepening blue sky. This is it, he said, cutting the engine. Help me with Thunder. Approaching the trailer, Jackson was struck by how still the air had become. No wind, no distant sounds of civilization, just the vast, watchful silence of the desert. He unlatched the trailer door with reverent care, as if performing the opening steps of a sacred ritual. Thunder's condition had deteriorated during the journey. The stallion's legs trembled violently, and his breathing came in labored gasps. It took both Jackson and Melissa to coax him down the ramp, each step seeming to cause the animal profound pain. "Dad," Melissa whispered, her earlier skepticism giving way to concern. "He's getting worse." "Maybe we should—" "No!" Jackson cut her off firmly. "We're here now. We follow through." As Thunder stood swaying on the sand, Jackson began unloading supplies: shovels, buckets, several large containers of water, a small tent, and bundles of herbs wrapped in burlap. "What are those?" Melissa asked, pointing to the herbs. "Remedies. Some from my grandfather's journal, others from a Navajo healer I visited last month when Thunder first showed symptoms." Jackson handed her a shovel. "We need to dig a shallow trench, long and wide enough for him to lie down comfortably." For the next hour, they worked in silence, excavating the sand as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. Thunder watched with doleful eyes, occasionally nickering softly as if questioning their strange behavior. When the depression was finally large enough, Jackson approached Thunder with a mixture of herbs and water, forming a paste which he began rubbing into the horse's muscles, focusing on the most affected areas along his back and hindquarters. "And this will help prepare him," Jackson explained, his voice taking on a gentler tone than Melissa had heard in years. "The herbs improve circulation and reduce inflammation. My grandfather called it waking up the sleeping muscles." After thoroughly applying the mixture, Jackson guided Thunder to the edge of the excavated area. "Now comes the hard part. We need to get him to lie down in the trench." It took nearly 30 minutes of gentle coaxing, with Thunder resisting at first, his instincts warring against voluntarily assuming such a vulnerable position. Finally, with Jackson whispering encouragements in his ear, the stallion carefully lowered himself into the depression, his large body settling heavily onto the sand. "Good boy," Jackson murmured, stroking Thunder's neck. "And now we begin." As the sun touched the distant mountains, casting long shadows across the dunes, Jackson started methodically covering Thunder's body with the excavated sand, leaving only his head, neck, and the top of his spine exposed. "The sand needs to be firm but not too heavy," he instructed Melissa. "We're creating pressure that will support his muscles, while the heat works deep into the tissue." Melissa helped, though her movements betrayed her lingering doubt. "How long do we leave him like this?" "Through the night, at least," Jackson replied, carefully packing sand around Thunder's hindquarters. "The real healing comes with the combination of time, heat, and the minerals in the sand. My grandfather would sometimes keep horses buried for days, massaging different muscle groups each morning and evening. As darkness began to fall, Thunder lay breathing steadily in his sand cocoon, his eyes reflecting the first stars appearing in the eastern sky. Jackson set up a small camp beside him, arranging his sleeping bag so he could remain within arm's reach of the stallion throughout the night. "You should get some rest," he told Melissa, "or tomorrow will be a long day." Melissa hesitated, looking between her father and the buried horse, the reality of their situation finally sinking in. "This is really happening, isn't it? We're actually doing this." Jackson nodded, his weathered face solemn in the gathering darkness. "We're doing this. And if there's any justice in this world, we're saving him." As night descended fully over the desert, bringing with it a profound silence, broken only by the occasional soft nicker from Thunder, Melissa realized they had crossed a point of no return. For better or worse, they had placed their trust in ancient wisdom and the healing power of the desert. The desert night brought a cold that penetrated bone deep, a startling contrast to the day's scorching heat. Jackson sat beside Thunder, massaging the exposed parts of the stallion's neck by the light of a small lantern. The horse's eyes, once wild with fear and pain, had grown calmer as the hours passed, occasionally closing in what appeared to be moments of relief. Melissa emerged from the tent, wrapped in a thick blanket, and settled beside her father. For a while, they sat in silence, the vast canopy of stars stretching above them in breathtaking clarity, far from the light pollution of civilization. "I've never seen so many stars," she finally said, her voice hushed as if speaking too loudly might shatter the pristine silence. Jackson nodded without looking up from his work, his fingers methodically kneading the muscles along Thunder's crest. "Your grandfather used to say that out here, you can hear God thinking." The mention of her grandfather brought a smile to Melissa's lips. "I remember him taking me camping when I was little. He'd tell me stories about the constellations, about how the ancient peoples used the stars to guide their lives." "He believed in the old ways," Jackson said softly, "not just because they were traditions, but because they worked. He saw connections that modern folks are too busy to notice." Melissa watched her father's hands, strong, calloused hands that had built a fortune but remained gentle enough to soothe a suffering animal. "Tell me about when you first got Thunder," she requested, pulling her blanket tighter against the desert chill. Jackson's rhythmic massaging continued as a smile touched his lips. "It was 15 years ago. That big storm had just destroyed the new training paddock, and I was in a foul mood. Drove to the Kentucky auction, more to get away from the ranch than to actually buy anything." He paused, his eyes taking on a distant look. "And then this scrawny 2-year-old comes into the ring, black as midnight with a white blaze shaped like a lightning bolt. Nobody was bidding high. He was underfed, skittish, had a mean reputation. But those eyes, Mel, those eyes had something special." "So you bought him," Melissa supplied, already knowing parts of the story but wanting to hear it again in this moment, under these stars. "Paid way too much, according to your mother," Jackson chuckled, the sound unexpectedly warm in the cold night air. "Brought him home, and for 2 months, couldn't get within 10 feet of him without him trying to take my head off. Your mother said I'd wasted money on a lost cause." His hands moved to a different area of Thunder's neck, and the horse released a soft exhale that sounded almost like contentment. "What changed?" Melissa asked, though she knew the answer. "Patience, respect. I stopped trying to dominate him and started trying to understand him." Jackson's voice grew softer. "One morning, I just sat in his paddock reading the newspaper, ignoring him completely. After about 2 hours, he walked over and put his head on my shoulder like he was reading along with me. From that day on, we had an understanding." Thunder had gone on to sire some of their most successful racehorses, establishing a bloodline that had become the foundation of Golden Horizon's reputation. His value went beyond dollars. He represented the turning point when their ranch had transformed from a struggling operation to an industry leader. "He's more than just a horse to you," Melissa observed. "He's a reminder that sometimes the things most worth having take the most work," Jackson replied, "and that first impressions aren't always right." The conversation lapsed into silence again. Eventually, Melissa returned to the tent, leaving her father to his vigil. Jackson continued his ministrations through the night, occasionally dozing but never fully surrendering to sleep. He alternated between massage and applying more of the herbal paste, speaking softly to Thunder throughout the long, cold hours. Dawn broke with the spectacular palette of colors that only a desert sunrise can produce. Deep purples giving way to fiery oranges, and finally a clear crystalline blue. As the first rays of sunlight touched the sand, Jackson noticed something that made his breath catch. Thunder's breathing had changed. It was deeper, more regular, without the shallow, pained quality it had carried for weeks. Melissa emerged from the tent, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "How is he?" she asked, her voice still thick with sleep. "Come see for yourself," Jackson replied, not taking his eyes off the stallion. As Melissa approached, Thunder raised his head slightly, a small movement, but one that had been beyond his strength the previous day. His eyes, clearer now, focused on her with what almost seemed like recognition. "Did you see that?" Jackson asked, excitement creeping into his voice. He lifted his head on his own, and look at his eyes. They're brighter. Melissa knelt beside the horse, her scientific skepticism warring with the evidence before her. "It could be temporary," she cautioned. "Maybe just the pressure of the sand supporting his muscles, giving him a brief respite. Or maybe it's working," Jackson countered. "Either way, we continue." They spent the morning carefully removing the top layer of sand, which had cooled overnight, and replacing it with fresh, sun-warmed sand from nearby. Jackson showed Melissa how to massage Thunder's muscles through the sand, applying pressure in long, steady strokes. "Like this," he demonstrated. "Feel for the knots and tension. When you find them, hold the pressure steady until you feel a release." By midday, the temperature had climbed into the high 90s. They erected a simple shade structure over Thunder's head to protect him from the worst of the heat, and Jackson continued applying the herbal mixture at regular intervals. "We need more water," Melissa noted, checking their supplies. "We're going through it faster than expected with this heat," Jackson nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "There's a natural spring about 5 miles east of here. Your grandfather showed it to me once. It's small but reliable." "I'll go," Melissa volunteered, surprising herself with her eagerness to help. "You should stay with Thunder. Just give me directions." As she prepared to leave with empty containers, Jackson called after her. "Melissa, be careful out there. The desert doesn't forgive mistakes," she nodded, understanding that his warning carried years of hard-earned respect for this harsh but beautiful landscape. As she walked away, following her father's directions, she glanced back to see Jackson once again bent over Thunder, his hands working with a healer's intuition that no veterinary school could teach. For the first time since this desperate gamble began, Melissa felt a flicker of hope. Not faith, exactly. She was still too pragmatic for that, but a growing willingness to believe that perhaps the desert held secrets modern medicine had yet to discover. Melissa trudged across the desert, empty water containers clinking against each other as she walked. The landscape that had seemed monotonous from the truck window now revealed itself as surprisingly varied. Patches of scrubby vegetation, unexpected rocky outcroppings, and subtle changes in the color and texture of the sand beneath her boots. Despite having grown up on the ranch, she'd never ventured this deep into the desert alone. Her father's directions had been characteristically sparse. Head east toward the tallest mesa. When you reach the split rock that looks like a wolf's head, turn south. The spring is nestled in a small grove of mesquite trees about half a mile from there. As she walked, her mind drifted to the corporate board meeting she was missing back in Carson City. As financial director, she'd spent months preparing a presentation on expanding their breeding program into international markets. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, trudging through the desert on an impossible quest to save one horse, while potentially jeopardizing deals that could secure the future of hundreds. "You're more like your father than you want to admit," her mother used to say before the cancer took her 5 years ago. The thought brought a rueful smile to Melissa's lips. She'd always considered herself the practical one, the voice of reason in a family of dreamers and risk-takers. Yet here she was, following her father into what any rational person would consider madness. After nearly an hour of walking, she spotted the wolf's head formation Jackson had described. The resemblance was uncanny, nature's sculpture creating the perfect illusion of a predator frozen in stone. Turning south as instructed, she pushed on despite the growing heat of the day. When she finally spotted the mesquite grove, it appeared like a mirage, an improbable splash of green against the relentless browns and tans of the desert. Approaching the trees, she heard it before she saw it, the soft, musical trickle of water. The spring was small but clear, bubbling up from between rocks to form a tiny pool before disappearing back into the sandy soil. Melissa knelt beside it, first testing the water by touch, cool and clean, before filling her containers. As she worked, a movement caught her eye. A desert cottontail rabbit watched her cautiously from beneath a mesquite tree, its ears twitching in alert vigilance. "Don't worry," she found herself saying aloud, her voice sounding strange after hours of silence. "I'm just borrowing some water." The rabbit continued its assessment before apparently deciding she posed no threat and returning to nibbling on sparse vegetation. Melissa watched it for a moment, struck by the resilience of desert life, finding sustenance and purpose in a place that seemed designed to resist both. With the containers filled, she took a moment to rest in the shade of the mesquite grove. Closing her eyes, she listened to the subtle symphony of the desert, the gentle rustling of leaves, the distant call of a hawk, the barely perceptible whisper of sand shifting in the breeze. For the first time in years, her mind wasn't racing with quarterly projections, investment strategies, or risk assessments. Instead, she found herself remembering childhood days spent with her grandfather, learning to track animals and identify edible plants. He'd been gone for 15 years now, but in this moment, she could almost hear his gravelly voice. "The desert ain't empty, Melly girl. It's just particular about who it shares its secrets with." The memory sparked another. Her grandfather, treating an injured mare using methods similar to what her father was attempting with Thunder. She'd been young, maybe 7 or 8, watching with wide eyes as he buried the horse's swollen leg in heated sand, explaining how the pressure and minerals would draw out the infection. To her child's amazement, it had worked. "Maybe I've been too quick to dismiss what I don't understand," she murmured to herself, echoing her father's words from the previous day. Gathering her strength and the filled water containers, Melissa began the journey back. The added weight made the trek more challenging, but her steps felt purposeful now, driven by something more than mere obligation to her father. As she crested a small rise about halfway back to their camp, she noticed a dust cloud in the distance, a vehicle approaching from the direction of the highway. Her heart sank as she recognized the distinct shape of Dr. Wilson's truck. "Damn it," she muttered, quickening her pace despite the heavy load. The last thing they needed was interference, well-intentioned or otherwise. By the time she reached the camp, Dr. Wilson was already there, engaged in a heated exchange with Jackson. Thunder remained partially buried in the sand, his head raised higher than Melissa had seen since they arrived, his eyes alert and tracking the confrontation unfolding before him. "This is borderline animal cruelty, Jackson, Doctor," Wilson was saying, his face flushed with anger and exertion from the desert heat. "I've contacted the State Veterinary Board. They're sending someone out." "On what grounds?" Jackson demanded, standing his ground between the veterinarian and Thunder. "He's my horse on my private property. I'm providing water, food, and continuous care." "Look at him!" Wilson gestured wildly. "Buried in the sand, like he's receiving a treatment that's showing results," Jackson interrupted firmly. "His breathing has improved. He's more alert. He's holding his head up on his own, something your medicine said would never happen again." Dr. Wilson scoffed, turning as Melissa approached. "Melissa, thank God. Please tell me you see how irrational this is. Whatever temporary improvement you think you're seeing is just the horse's survival instinct. You're prolonging his suffering." Melissa set down the water containers, taking a moment to observe Thunder. What she saw surprised her. The horse's eyes were bright and focused, his ears forward with interest rather than pinned back in pain. There was a vitality present that had been absent for weeks. "And how did you find us?" she asked instead of answering Wilson's plea. The veterinarian ran a hand through his thinning hair. "One of your ranch hands said he was worried about both of you out here, not just the horse." "Jake," Jackson muttered, "always did talk too much." "I came out here to help," Wilson insisted, his tone softening slightly. "I've brought proper pain medication, equipment to make Thunder comfortable for his final hours. We can do this humanely, right here if that's what you want." "Final hours," Jackson repeated incredulously. "Look at him, really look. That horse isn't dying anymore." Wilson reluctantly approached Thunder, his professional curiosity momentarily overriding his disapproval. He knelt beside the horse, checking his eyes, feeling his pulse, listening to his breathing. "His vitals are better than I would have expected," he admitted grudgingly. But that doesn't mean..." "It means we continue," Jackson stated with finality. "You can stay and observe if you want, or you can leave. But we're not ending this treatment." Dr. Wilson straightened, brushing sand from his knees. He looked from Jackson to Melissa, seeking an ally. "This isn't sustainable. Even if there is temporary improvement, you can't keep him buried out here indefinitely." It was the moment of choice, the rational, business-minded part of Melissa wanting to side with science and professional opinion, while something deeper, more instinctual, pulled her toward her father's unwavering faith in the desert's healing power. "I think," she said carefully, meeting Dr. Wilson's expectant gaze, "we should give it another day. If you're concerned, you're welcome to stay and monitor his condition." The look of betrayal on Wilson's face was quickly masked by professional composure. "Fine, one more day, but I'm documenting everything. And if I see signs of increased suffering, I'll call in authorities immediately." As Wilson retreated to his truck to retrieve his medical bag, Jackson gave Melissa a questioning look. "And you're siding with me now?" "I'm siding with Thunder," she replied, kneeling to stroke the horse's forehead. "Something's happening here. I don't understand it, but I want to see where it leads." The afternoon stretched into evening with an uneasy truce established between Jackson and Dr. Wilson. The veterinarian maintained a professional distance, periodically checking Thunder's vitals and making notes in a small, leather-bound journal. Jackson continued his regimen of massage and herbal applications, seemingly oblivious to the doctor's disapproving glances. Melissa busied herself preparing a simple meal over a small campfire, the familiar task grounding her amid the surreal circumstances. As she worked, she found herself watching the interaction between her father and Thunder with new eyes. There was an intimacy to their connection that transcended the typical relationship between man and animal, a wordless communication that flowed between them like an invisible current. "His heart rate is stabilizing," Dr. Wilson announced reluctantly as the sun began its descent. "And his respiratory distress has decreased markedly since this morning." Jackson didn't look up from his work, but the slight upturn at the corner of his mouth betrayed his satisfaction. "The sand is drawing out the inflammation. My grandfather called it the desert's embrace, pressure and heat working together to reset the body's natural balance." Wilson's expression remained skeptical. "There are scientific explanations for what you're describing. Heat therapy, compression therapy, both are recognized treatments, though not typically administered this way. Sometimes old wisdom and new science arrive at the same destination by different paths, Jackson replied, his hands never ceasing their methodical work. Melissa approached with 3 plates of beans and canned meat warmed over the fire. "You should both eat something," she said, offering the simple fare. "Doctor." Wilson accepted his plate with murmured thanks, sitting on a nearby rock. "I've been reviewing Thunder's case history," he said after a few bites. Progressive equine muscular dystrophy typically follows a predictable decline. What we're seeing here, if it's real and not temporary, defies conventional understanding. "If it's real," Jackson repeated, setting down his plate untouched. "Are you suggesting we're imagining his improvement?" "I'm suggesting," Wilson replied carefully, "that hope can be a powerful lens through which we view reality. It can make us see what we desperately want to see." A tense silence followed, broken only by the soft snorting of thunder as Jackson resumed massaging the stallion's neck. "What about you, Melissa?" Wilson asked, turning to her. "You've always been the pragmatic one. What do you see when you look at Thunder now?" Melissa considered the question, taking her time to formulate an answer that honored both her analytical nature and what her eyes were telling her. "I see measurable improvement," she finally said. "His breathing is steadier, his eyes are clearer and more alert. He's holding his head up without assistance." She paused, then added, "But I also recognize that correlation doesn't equal causation. Whether it's the sand, the herbs, the massage, or some combination, or whether he would have improved anyway, I can't say with certainty." Wilson nodded appreciatively at her measured response. "At least someone here maintains scientific objectivity." "Objectivity has its place," Jackson interjected, "but so does intuition. So does experience passed down through generations." As if to punctuate his point, Thunder suddenly nickered softly and attempted to shift position within his sandy enclosure. A small movement, but one that demonstrated strength that had been absent days before. All 3 humans fell silent, watching as the stallion struggled briefly before settling again, his dark eyes regarding them with what almost seemed like impatience. "He wants to move," Jackson said quietly. "That's a good sign." Dr. Wilson approached cautiously, kneeling to examine Thunder more closely. His professional demeanor couldn't fully mask his surprise as he checked the horse's muscle responses. "There's definitely increased tone in the shoulder and neck muscles," he admitted. "And the tremors have decreased significantly." "Tomorrow morning," Jackson announced, "we'll help him stand." Wilson's head snapped up. "That's premature. Even with these improvements, his muscular system is nowhere near ready to support his weight." "We won't know until we try," Jackson countered, "and I'm not suggesting we yank him to his feet. We'll remove the sand gradually, support him properly, give him the chance to find his strength." As the men argued the merits of this next step, Melissa found herself drawn to Thunder's steady gaze. Kneeling beside him, she stroked his forehead gently. "What do you think, big guy?" she whispered. "Are you ready to try standing tomorrow?" To her surprise, Thunder responded with a soft whicker and pressed his muzzle against her hand, a gesture so deliberate it sent a shiver down her spine. In that moment, the financial director, who trusted only in numbers and provable facts, felt something shift within her, like a door, long locked, creaking open to admit new possibilities. As night fell once more over the desert, they established a rotation, Jackson, Melissa, and even the reluctant Dr. Wilson taking turns to monitor Thunder and maintain the treatment. During her watch, Melissa found herself humming softly, songs her grandfather had taught her about the desert and its mysteries. Thunder seemed to listen, his ears flicking forward whenever she began a new melody. "I think he likes your singing, Doctor," Wilson commented, approaching to relieve her for his shift. "My grandfather used to say music helps healing." she replied, surprised to hear herself referencing the old wisdom she'd spent years dismissing. Wilson settled himself beside Thunder, medical bag within easy reach. "You know," he said after a pause, "in veterinary school, they teach us that healing is a science. Measurable, predictable, protocol-driven. But in 30 years of practice, I've occasionally encountered cases that defy explanation." Melissa raised an eyebrow. "Are you saying you're starting to believe in my father's desert cure?" "I'm saying," Wilson replied carefully, "that I'm willing to observe without judgment a little longer. Sometimes that's the best approach to the unexpected." As Melissa retreated to her tent, she glanced back to see the veterinarian, a man of science and modern medicine, gently running his hand along Thunder's neck, whispering something too quiet for her to hear. The sight brought a smile to her lips and carried her into dreams filled with desert winds and ancient healing songs. Dawn arrived with a spectacular array of colors painting the eastern sky, the cool morning air carrying a crispness that would soon surrender to the day's heat. Jackson was already awake, carefully removing small amounts of sand from around Thunder's shoulders and forelegs, preparing for the moment they had discussed the previous night. Melissa emerged from her tent to find Dr. Wilson checking Thunder's vital signs once more, his face a study in conflicted emotions. "His heart rate is strong and regular," the veterinarian reported, straightening up. "Temperature, normal. Respiration significantly improved." "And the muscle tone?" Jackson asked without pausing in his work. Wilson hesitated before answering. "Better than I would have expected, but that doesn't mean his muscles are ready to support his full weight. Equine muscular dystrophy doesn't just reverse itself overnight." "Maybe not with conventional treatment," Jackson replied, continuing to clear sand away from Thunder's body. "But we're not dealing with convention here." The morning preparations continued with methodical care. Jackson mixed a stronger batch of his herbal remedy, explaining to Melissa that this variation was specifically designed to prepare muscles for exertion. Dr. Wilson, despite his lingering skepticism, helped position support straps they had fashioned from spare blankets and rope. "These will help distribute his weight more evenly when he tries to stand," Wilson explained, his slip revealing his own growing hope despite professional caution. By mid-morning, Thunder was almost completely free of sand, though they had constructed supportive banks around his body to prevent him from rolling or making sudden movements that might cause injury. The stallion seemed increasingly alert, his eyes tracking their movements with keen interest, his ears pricked forward in anticipation. "Everyone ready?" Jackson asked, positioning himself at Thunder's head, while Melissa and Dr. Wilson took positions along his back and hindquarters. Melissa felt her heart pounding. Despite the improvements they'd witnessed, the thought of Thunder attempting to stand seemed both premature and terrifying. What if he failed? What if the effort caused a setback or, worse, damaged something beyond repair? "We go slow," Jackson instructed. "Let him set the pace. Our job is to support, not force." He knelt beside Thunder's head, speaking in low, encouraging tones that Melissa couldn't quite make out. The horse's ears flicked back and forth, seemingly absorbing every word. Then, with a gentle hand on Thunder's neck, Jackson gave the signal, "Now, boy, try now." For several agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Thunder lay still, his eyes fixed on Jackson's face. Then, with a sudden surge of effort that took everyone by surprise, he thrust his forelegs forward, attempting to lever his massive body upward. "Steady!" Wilson called as they rushed to support the horse with the improvised straps. "Don't let him put too much weight on his hind legs yet." Thunder struggled, muscles trembling violently with exertion. He managed to raise his front end slightly before collapsing back into the sand with a frustrated whicker, sides heaving with the effort. "It's okay, boy," Jackson soothed, stroking Thunder's neck. "First try. We'll rest and try again." Melissa felt a crushing disappointment, heightened by the look of resigned vindication on Dr. Wilson's face. For a brief moment, she had allowed herself to truly believe in the impossible. "Dune, his muscles simply aren't strong enough yet," Wilson said gently, as if breaking difficult news. "This kind of atrophy takes months of physical therapy to reverse, if it can be reversed at all." Jackson didn't respond, continuing to stroke Thunder's neck and whisper encouragements. After several minutes of rest, he looked up with determination etched in every line of his weathered face. "Once more," he said. "But this time, I want to try something different." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden whistle carved in the shape of a horse's head. Melissa recognized it immediately. Her grandfather's training whistle, used specifically with his most prized horses. "Dad," she began, uncertain. "Thunder was never trained with that whistle. He wouldn't." "Not consciously," Jackson cut her off. "But some things speak to deeper instincts. This sound has called horses in our family to their feet for 3 generations. Before either Melissa or Dr. Wilson could object, Jackson raised the whistle to his lips and blew a pattern of 3 ascending notes, followed by a single, sustained tone that seemed to hang in the desert air like a physical presence. Thunder's reaction was immediate and astonishing. His ears shot forward, his eyes widened, and with a powerful surge that caught everyone off guard, he thrust his front legs forward while simultaneously pushing with his hind legs. "Support him!" Jackson shouted, dropping the whistle to grab the straps on his side. Melissa and Dr. Wilson scrambled to position themselves, pulling upward on their respective supports as Thunder fought to rise. For one terrible moment, the horse's legs buckled, threatening to send him crashing back down. Then, as if drawing strength from some unseen source, his muscles locked, holding him in a half-standing position. "Come on, boy," Jackson urged, his voice thick with emotion. "You can do this." With a final Herculean effort, Thunder pushed himself fully upright, standing on trembling legs, sides heaving with exertion but unquestionably on his feet. The triumph in his dark eyes was unmistakable, an animal knowing he had accomplished something monumental. "My God," Dr. Wilson breathed, his professional skepticism momentarily forgotten in the face of what could only be described as miraculous. "He's standing." Thunder took one experimental step, then another, each movement cautious, but growing more confident. Jackson walked beside him, one hand lightly touching the horse's shoulder, ready to provide support if needed. But Thunder continued on his own power, each step steadier than the last. Melissa felt tears streaming down her face, unashamed of the emotion overwhelming her. "Dad," she managed to choke out, "you were right." "You were right all along." For the next hour, they helped Thunder navigate the immediate area, never rushing, allowing him to build confidence with each successful step. When he finally showed signs of tiring, they guided him back to a freshly prepared bed of sand where he could rest comfortably. As Thunder settled down, Dr. Wilson knelt to examine his legs, his expression a mixture of amazement and professional curiosity. "The muscle tone has improved dramatically," he admitted, "and he's showing none of the tremors that were so pronounced before. I can't explain it medically." "Some things exist beyond medical explanation," Jackson replied without a trace of smugness. "Just the quiet satisfaction of a man whose faith had been vindicated." Melissa sat nearby, watching Thunder rest after his tremendous achievement. The horse's eyes were alert but peaceful, occasionally closing in apparent contentment as Jackson massaged his legs, preparing them for the next attempt later that day. "You know what this means?" she said to her father. "If Thunder can recover this much in just a few days." Jackson nodded, understanding her implication. Then maybe there are other horses we could help, other treatments from the old ways that modern medicine has forgotten. Doctor. Wilson looked up from his examination, his scientific mind already racing with possibilities. If we could document this process, study the components of those herbs, analyze the mineral content of this specific sand, there could be applications beyond what any of us imagined. A bridge between old wisdom and new science, Melissa suggested, recalling her father's words from the previous day. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, bathing the desert in golden light, Melissa felt a profound shift in her understanding of the world. The neat categories she had used to organize her life, practical versus impractical, scientific versus spiritual, modern versus traditional, seemed suddenly inadequate, their boundaries blurring like the horizon in a desert mirage. Thunder nickered softly, drawing her attention back to the present moment. The stallion's eyes met hers with an intelligence that seemed to transcend the barrier between species, as if acknowledging that they had both been transformed by this desert pilgrimage. "What happens next?" she asked, the question directed at no one in particular. "We continue," Jackson replied simply, "one step at a time, just like thunder." By late afternoon, Thunder was standing again, this time with less assistance. His movements remained cautious but showed a fluidity that Dr. Wilson admitted was nothing short of remarkable. The stallion's eyes had regained their legendary fire, the look that had made him one of the most sought-after sires in 3 states. "I need to document this properly," Dr. Wilson said, retrieving a digital camera from his truck. My colleagues won't believe it otherwise." As the veterinarian photographed Thunder from various angles, Jackson sat on a nearby rock, allowing himself a moment of rest after days of nearly constant attention to the horse. Melissa joined him, passing him a canteen of water. "You haven't slept more than an hour at a stretch since we got here," she observed. "You need to rest, Dad." Jackson took a long drink before responding. "I'll rest when we get him home." "At this rate, that might be sooner than we thought," Melissa remarked, watching Thunder tentatively walk a small circle under Dr. Wilson's watchful eye. "Yesterday, I couldn't imagine him ever standing again. Now he's walking." Jackson nodded, his eyes never leaving the stallion. "Your grandfather would say Thunder simply remembered who he was. That illness can make us forget our true nature for a while, but given the right conditions, we can remember." "You really believe that, don't you?" Melissa asked, studying her father's profile, the deep lines carved by years under the desert sun, the determined set of his jaw that she'd inherited. "I do," he replied simply, "and not just about horses, about people too." The comment hung between them, layered with meaning. Melissa knew he was referring to her own journey over these past days, from skeptic to reluctant believer. Before she could respond, the sound of an approaching vehicle drew their attention. A white SUV with the logo of the Nevada Department of Agriculture was making its way toward their camp, dust billowing behind it. "Trouble," Jackson muttered, rising to his feet with a wince that betrayed his exhaustion. "Doctor." Wilson approached quickly, his expression concerned. That would be Dr. Eleanor Winters, State Veterinary Inspector. "She called me this morning asking for your exact location." "You gave it to her?" Jackson demanded, his voice sharp with accusation. Wilson had the grace to look embarrassed. "I'm bound by professional ethics, Jackson. When a state inspector asks where to find a potentially endangered animal, I can't exactly lie." The SUV pulled to a stop nearby, and a tall woman in her 50s emerged, dressed in practical khakis with a department badge clipped to her belt. Her grey-streaked hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her expression equally austere as she surveyed the scene. "Dr. Wilson," she acknowledged with a brief nod, before turning to Jackson. "Mr. Harrington, I presume? I'm Dr. Winters, State Veterinary Inspector. We received a report about an unauthorized and potentially harmful treatment being administered to an ailing horse." Jackson stepped forward, positioning himself between the inspector and Thunder. "My horse is receiving treatment on my private property. There's nothing unauthorized about that." Dr. Winters raised an eyebrow. "Traditional veterinary care, yes. Burying a dying animal in sand while denying it proper medical attention, that falls under potential animal cruelty, which is within my jurisdiction regardless of whose property we're on." Before Jackson could retort, Melissa intervened, stepping forward with the composed professionalism she'd developed over years of corporate negotiations. "Dr. Winters, I'm Melissa Harrington, co-owner of Golden Horizon Ranch. Before you make any determinations, I'd suggest you examine the horse in question." She gestured toward Thunder, who stood nearby watching the proceedings with alert interest. A far cry from the suffering animal described in whatever report had prompted this visit. Dr. Winters' eyes widened slightly as she took in Thunder's condition. She had clearly expected to find a horse in dire straits, not one standing steadily and showing clear signs of improvement. "And Dr. Wilson," she said, turning to the veterinarian, "is this the horse you described as suffering from advanced equine muscular dystrophy, the one you recommended for euthanasia less than a week ago?" Wilson nodded, moving to stand beside Thunder. "The very same, and while I can't explain it scientifically, I can confirm that he's showing remarkable improvement since Mr. Harrington began this alternative treatment. Dr. Winters approached Thunder cautiously, her professional scrutiny evident as she examined him. "May I?" she asked Jackson, indicating her intention to check the horse more thoroughly. Jackson nodded tersely, his stance remaining protective but allowing the inspection. For several minutes, Dr. Winters conducted a detailed examination, checking Thunder's vital signs, muscle responses, and overall condition. Her expression gradually shifted from skepticism to puzzlement to grudging amazement. "According to your report filed 3 days ago," she finally said to Dr. Wilson, "this horse couldn't stand unassisted and showed severe muscle atrophy consistent with late-stage PEMD. Yet here he is, standing, walking and showing muscle tone that, while still compromised, is significantly better than what your report described." "That's what I've been trying to tell you," Jackson interjected. "The desert sand treatment works. My grandfather used it, his father before him. It's not some crackpot idea, it's traditional knowledge that modern medicine has forgotten." "Doctor." Winters pulled out a tablet and made several notes before addressing Jackson again. "Mr. Harrington, I'm required to investigate all reports of potential animal cruelty or neglect. Based on what I'm seeing, this animal is not currently in distress and appears to be receiving adequate care, unorthodox as it may be." She paused, glancing around at their camp. "However, I'm concerned about the sustainability of this situation. You have limited supplies, extreme temperatures, and a horse that, while improving, still requires ongoing medical monitoring. We're not taking him back until the treatment is complete," Jackson stated firmly. "And when will that be?" Dr. Winters challenged. "What's your endpoint? What criteria are you using to determine when he's recovered enough?" The questions hit on the very uncertainty Melissa had been grappling with herself. For all the improvement they'd witnessed, they were still operating on faith and intuition rather than a defined treatment protocol. To her surprise, it was Dr. Wilson who answered. "Dr. Winters, I came out here fully prepared to end this experiment and administer euthanasia if necessary. Instead, I've witnessed something that defies conventional veterinary understanding. I believe Mr. Harrington deserves the opportunity to complete the treatment he's begun." Dr. Winters looked between the three of them, her professional obligation warring with the evidence before her eyes. Finally, she sighed. "I can give you 3 more days. After that, either the horse returns to proper facilities for continued care, or I'll be forced to take more definitive action." After Dr. Winters departed, leaving behind a formal notice of the 3-day deadline. An uneasy silence fell over the camp. Thunder, seemingly oblivious to the bureaucratic drama surrounding him, continued his careful exploration of the immediate area, each step more confident than the last. 3 days isn't enough, Jackson muttered, watching the dust cloud from the departing SUV. My grandfather's journal mentioned treatments lasting up to 2 weeks for the most severe cases. But Thunder's already showing significant improvement, Melissa pointed out. Maybe 3 more days will be enough to get him strong enough for transport back to the ranch, where we can continue his care in better conditions. Jackson shook his head stubbornly. The mineral content of this specific sand is crucial. The temperature variations between day and night, the desert air itself, we can't replicate those conditions at the ranch. Dr. Wilson, who had been quiet since Dr. Winters' departure, finally spoke. What if we could, or at least partially? Both Harringtons turned to him with questioning looks. I've been thinking, Wilson continued, warming to his idea. If we collected enough of this sand, analyzed its mineral content, created a controlled environment at the ranch with proper temperature regulation, we might be able to continue the treatment there while still having access to conventional medical support if needed. A bridge between old and new, Melissa said, echoing their earlier conversation. Jackson looked skeptical, but not entirely dismissive. Wouldn't be the same. No, Wilson agreed, but it might be close enough, and it would satisfy the legal requirements while still honoring the traditional approach that's clearly working. As they discussed possibilities, Melissa noticed Thunder had wandered a short distance away and was now attempting to graze on a sparse patch of desert grass, an ordinary behavior that seemed extraordinary given his condition just days before. The sight filled her with a complex emotion she couldn't immediately name, something like hope but deeper, more primal. Later that evening, as the desert surrendered its scorching heat to the cool embrace of night, Melissa found her father sitting alone by the small campfire, his face illuminated by the dancing flames. Dr. Wilson had retired to his truck to sleep, leaving father and daughter in a rare moment of privacy. "Tell me about Grandpa's journal," she said, settling beside him on the sand. "You mentioned it contained details about these treatments." Jackson reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small, leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age, the binding cracked and worn. "I've carried this with me every day since he died," he said, handling it with reverence. Not just for the healing knowledge it contains, but because it's his voice, his wisdom preserved. He carefully opened it, turning to a page marked with a faded ribbon. "Here's what he wrote about Thunder's condition," he said, holding it where Melissa could see the neat, precise handwriting. She leaned closer, reading aloud. "When the horse's muscles begin to waste, when standing becomes impossible and death seems certain, look to the desert's embrace. The healing sands near Eagle Peak contain the Earth's own medicine, minerals from ancient seas, warmed by the sun and cooled by the night. 3 days minimum for mild cases, up to 14 for the most severe. The sand must cover the body, leaving only the head free. Massage twice daily with the desert sage mixture. Listen for the horse's spirit to reawaken." Melissa looked up from the journal to her father's face. "He wrote this before Thunder was even born, before this disease even affected our horses." Jackson nodded. He wasn't writing about Thunder specifically. He was recording knowledge passed down through generations, preserving it for when it would be needed. Just as you're doing now, Melissa realized, preserving knowledge that might otherwise be lost. That's the responsibility we inherit, Jackson said softly. And not just the land, not just the horses, but the wisdom that connects us to both. In that moment, Melissa understood her father more clearly than she had in years, not as the stubborn, impractical dreamer she'd often dismissed him as, but as a custodian of something precious and increasingly rare in the modern world. A direct connection to generations of accumulated wisdom about living in harmony with the land and its creatures. As if sensing the significance of the moment, Thunder approached the campfire, standing near them with quiet presence. The stallion's recovery remained incomplete. His muscles still showed signs of weakness, and his movements lacked their former power and grace. But the transformation from dying animal to healing one was undeniable. Jackson reached up to stroke Thunder's neck. 3 more days, he said, the words both promise and prayer. Make them count, old friend. The next morning broke with renewed purpose. If they had only 3 days remaining before Dr. Winters returned, they would make every hour count. Jackson rose before dawn, carefully examining Thunder by the light of his lantern. The stallion greeted him with a soft nicker of recognition, already standing when Jackson approached, a sight that would have seemed impossible just days ago. "Look at you," Jackson murmured, running his hands along Thunder's flanks, assessing the muscle tone that continued to improve. "Standing on your own to meet the day." Dr. Wilson emerged from his truck, medical bag in hand, ready for the morning examination that had become routine. His improvement continues to defy conventional prognosis, he noted, checking Thunder's vitals. "I've been reviewing the literature all night, looking for any documented cases of spontaneous recovery from PEMD. And, Jackson prompted, already knowing the answer. Nothing remotely comparable, Wilson admitted. The best outcomes with conventional treatment show modest improvement over months, not dramatic recovery in days. Melissa joined them, bringing coffee in metal camping mugs. "So what's our plan for these 3 days?" "Just continue what we've been doing." Jackson shook his head. "We need to intensify the treatment. My grandfather's journal mentions a critical phase when the horse starts showing significant improvement. That's when you push harder. More frequent massage, stronger herbal applications, and controlled exercise." "More exercise could risk muscle strain," Dr. Wilson cautioned. "We need to be careful not to undo the progress we've made, which is why we do it right," Jackson replied, pulling a small leather pouch from his supplies. "This is the strengthening mixture, different from what we've been using, more potent. My grandfather reserved it for this stage of recovery." Dr. Wilson took the pouch, opening it cautiously and sniffing the contents. Some kind of liniment. A combination of desert sage, juniper, creosote, and other herbs that grow only in these mountains, Jackson explained. Mixed with rendered animal fat to help it penetrate deep into the muscle tissue. While Jackson prepared the mixture, Melissa led Thunder on a short walk, marveling at how much steadier his gait had become overnight. The stallion moved with growing confidence, occasionally testing his strength with a small trot before settling back into a walk. "He remembers who he is," Jackson said, echoing his words from the previous day as he watched them. For the next several hours, they worked as a team, Jackson applying the strengthening mixture and performing the more intensive massage techniques described in his grandfather's journal. Dr. Wilson monitoring Thunder's vital signs and muscle responses to ensure they weren't pushing too hard, and Melissa leading the stallion through progressively more challenging walking patterns. By midday, Thunder was trotting short distances without hesitation, his movements still lacking their former power, but showing a coordination that bordered on miraculous given his condition less than a week ago. "We should document this systematically, Doctor," Wilson suggested, setting up his camera on a tripod. Before and after videos, detailed notes on the treatment protocols, analysis of the herbal components. This could be groundbreaking. "You're thinking like a scientist again," Jackson observed, though without the dismissive tone he might have used days earlier. "Is that so wrong?" Wilson asked. "But if this treatment works as dramatically as it appears to, don't you want others to benefit from it?" Jackson paused in his work, considering, "My grandfather believed this knowledge belonged to those who respected it, who approached it with the right spirit, not to be packaged into pills or products by pharmaceutical companies." "But surely he wanted to help as many horses as possible," Melissa interjected. "Isn't there a middle ground? A way to share this knowledge while preserving its integrity?" The question hung in the air, unanswered but resonant with possibilities. As they continued their work throughout the afternoon, Melissa noticed her father watching Dr. Wilson with a new consideration in his gaze, as if reassessing the veterinarian's potential role in preserving rather than dismissing traditional knowledge. By evening, Thunder showed signs of fatigue, but of a healthy, natural kind, the weariness that comes from beneficial exertion rather than the exhaustion of disease. They settled him in a comfortable bed of sand for the night, Jackson applying a final treatment of the strengthening mixture. "Tomorrow we'll try a canter," Jackson announced as they gathered around the campfire for dinner. If his progress continues at this rate, he might even be ready for a short gallop by the time Dr. Winters returns. "A gallop?" Dr. Wilson nearly choked on his food. "Jackson, that's extremely ambitious. Even with his remarkable improvement, his muscles have experienced significant atrophy. A gallop could risk serious injury." "We'll assess him carefully before attempting it," Jackson conceded. "But I know Thunder. I can read his body, his eyes. He'll tell us when he's ready." As darkness settled over the desert, a profound quiet enveloped their camp, broken only by the occasional snort from Thunder or the distant call of a coyote. Melissa sat alone at the edge of the firelight, gazing up at the vast canopy of stars. The events of the past few days had shifted something fundamental in her understanding of the world, leaving her simultaneously more uncertain and more alive than she'd felt in years. "Penny for your thoughts," came Dr. Wilson's voice as he settled beside her on the sand. Melissa smiled faintly. "They might be worth a bit more than that. I'm contemplating a significant career pivot." "Oh." Wilson raised an eyebrow. "And for 15 years, I've focused on the business side of the ranch, maximizing profits, expanding operations, building the brand, all important, but now you're seeing another dimension to your family's legacy," Wilson suggested when she trailed off. She nodded. "This knowledge my father and grandfather preserved, it's valuable in ways that can't be quantified on a balance sheet. I'm thinking about how to honor that, how to integrate it into our modern operation without compromising its essence." "A bridge between worlds," Wilson mused, echoing their earlier conversations. "Exactly. A research foundation, perhaps, dedicated to studying traditional healing practices for horses, documenting them properly, testing them against scientific standards, but with respect for their origins and cultural context." Wilson considered this, his expression thoughtful in the flickering firelight. "It would be controversial in veterinary circles. You'd face skepticism, resistance, like my father has all these years," Melissa smiled wryly. "Maybe it's a family trait after all, stubbornness in the face of disbelief." Their conversation was interrupted by a sound from Thunder's direction, a soft, but distinctive whinny followed by the unmistakable sound of hooves pawing at sand. They turned to see the stallion standing fully alert, head raised high, nostrils flared as he tested the night air. Jackson emerged from his tent, immediately attuned to the change in Thunder's demeanor. "What is it, boy?" he asked, approaching cautiously. Thunder turned toward the eastern horizon, ears pricked forward intently. A moment later, they all heard it, the distant rumble of hoofbeats, growing steadily closer. "Wild horses," Jackson said softly, a note of wonder in his voice. "There's a small herd that ranges through these mountains. Rarely seen, especially this close to humans." As if summoned by an invisible call, Thunder responded with a powerful whinny that echoed across the desert, a sound of strength and vitality that none of them had heard from him in months. He moved restlessly in place, his body language communicating an unmistakable desire. "He wants to go to them," Melissa realized aloud. "It's too dangerous," Dr. Wilson protested immediately. "He's not strong enough for that kind of exertion, and in the dark." But Jackson was already moving, gathering Thunder's halter and lead rope. "Some calls can't be denied," he said with quiet certainty. "This isn't just about physical healing anymore, it's about spirit." Before Wilson could object further, Jackson had slipped the halter over Thunder's head and was leading him toward the perimeter of their camp. "We won't go far," he assured them. "Just to where he can see them, where they can see him." Melissa and Dr. Wilson exchanged glances before simultaneously reaching for flashlights and following. They crested a small rise just beyond camp, and there in the moonlight, perhaps a quarter-mile distant, moved the wild herd, a dozen or so horses flowing like shadows across the desert floor, their movements synchronized in ancient harmony. Thunder stood transfixed, his entire body quivering not with weakness, but with a primal recognition. When Jackson quietly removed the halter, Melissa gasped. "Dad, you can't—" "I'm not letting him go," Jackson assured her, though he made no move to restrain the stallion. "I'm letting him choose." For several breathless moments, Thunder remained motionless, caught between the wild call of his kind and the human connection that had defined his life. Then, with deliberate dignity, he took 3 steps forward before stopping, turning his head back toward Jackson with what could only be described as questioning permission. "It's okay, boy," Jackson said softly. "Show me what you can do." With that subtle encouragement, Thunder turned back toward the wild herd and broke into a trot, stiff at first, then smoother as his body remembered its natural rhythms. The trot became a canter, the canter an uneven but determined gallop that carried him down the slope toward the moonlit plain where the wild horses moved. Dr. Wilson made a sound of professional dismay, but even he couldn't tear his eyes away from the magnificent sight of the stallion running free, a horse that less than a week ago had been deemed beyond saving, now racing toward his wild counterparts with growing strength and unmistakable joy. The wild herd paused at Thunder's approach, the lead stallion moving forward cautiously to meet this unexpected visitor. The humans watched, breathless, as the 2 horses circled each other in the moonlight, communicating in a language older than words. After what seemed an eternity, but was perhaps only minutes, Thunder broke from the encounter and turned back toward camp, running with visibly renewed vigor, as if his brief communion with the wild herd had completed some essential circuit in his healing. He returned to Jackson's side, sides heaving, but eyes bright with an inner fire that transcended physical recovery. It was the look of an animal that had not just regained its strength, but had been reminded of its deepest nature, its reason for being. "That," Jackson said quietly, replacing the halter with gentle hands, "is how you know when the healing is complete." And as they led Thunder back to camp, Melissa understood that they had witnessed something beyond conventional explanation, a moment when ancient wisdom, natural instinct, and the mysterious power of the desert had combined to create nothing short of miraculous restoration. The day after Thunder's moonlight encounter with the wild herd dawned with a palpable sense of possibility. When Jackson approached the stallion for his morning examination, he found him already alert and eager, nickering a greeting that sounded remarkably like his old self. The transformation was unmistakable, as if the communion with his wild counterparts had accelerated his healing in ways none of them could have predicted. "Look at his eyes," Jackson said, as Melissa and Dr. Wilson joined him. "That's the Thunder I've known for 15 years. Dr. Wilson conducted his examination with growing amazement. "His muscle tone has improved dramatically overnight," he reported, running professional hands along Thunder's flanks. "The difference is, well, I'd say it defies medical explanation, but that's becoming a common refrain out here." "Not defying explanation," Jackson corrected gently. "Just requiring a different kind of understanding. My grandfather would say Thunder needed to remember who he was at his core. The wild herd reminded him." Wilson nodded slowly, no longer dismissive of such perspectives. "There's growing research on the psychological components of physical healing," he conceded. "The mind-body connection is stronger than Western medicine has traditionally acknowledged." "So, what's the plan for today?" Melissa asked, watching as Thunder moved with newfound confidence around their camp. "We push forward," Jackson replied, mixing a fresh batch of the strengthening herbs. 2 more days until Dr. Winters returns. By then, I want Thunder not just walking or trotting, but galloping with his full power restored." While Jackson applied the herbal mixture, Melissa noticed Dr. Wilson making detailed notes and sketches in a journal similar to her grandfather's. When she raised an eyebrow questioningly, the veterinarian looked almost embarrassed. "I'm documenting everything," he explained. The exact composition of the herbal remedies, the massage techniques, the timing of applications, it's too important not to record properly." "For a scientific paper?" she asked. Wilson considered this. "Perhaps eventually. But for now, just to preserve the knowledge, your father's right. This approach to healing deserves respect, not dismissal." As the morning progressed, they established a new, more intensive routine. Jackson led Thunder through increasingly challenging exercises: circles, figure eights, short canters followed by controlled stops and starts. The stallion responded with growing enthusiasm, occasionally tossing his head or giving a small buck that spoke of returning vitality. "He's showing off," Melissa laughed after one particularly spirited display. "He's remembering his strength," Jackson corrected, though his eyes crinkled with pleasure at the sight. "Muscle memory is powerful. His body is recalling what it's capable of." By midday, Thunder was cantering confidently across the flat desert plain near their camp, his stride lengthening with each circuit. Though still not at his former glory, the improvement was so dramatic that Dr. Wilson found himself continuously shaking his head in disbelief. "But if I hadn't seen this with my own eyes, I would never have believed it possible," he admitted, as they watched Thunder complete a particularly smooth sequence of movements. "In all my years of practice, I've never witnessed a recovery like this. Because modern veterinary medicine doesn't embrace these methods," Jackson suggested, without the antagonism that might have colored similar statements days earlier. "Because most veterinarians, myself included until now, haven't been exposed to them," Wilson countered thoughtfully, "or haven't seen them applied with such knowledge and care." As they spoke, a distant dust cloud on the horizon caught Melissa's attention. "We have company again," she announced, pointing toward the approaching vehicle. Jackson tensed immediately, but as the vehicle drew nearer, they realized it wasn't Dr. Winters returning early. Instead, a familiar ranch truck pulled up, driven by Jake, the foreman from Golden Horizon. "Boss!" Jake called as he stepped out, relief evident in his voice. "Been worried sick about you all. Cell service out here is non-existent, and after Dr. Wilson didn't return..." He trailed off as his eyes fell on Thunder, who was trotting toward them with a fluid grace that would have been impossible a week ago. "Holy..." "Hello, Jake," Jackson greeted calmly, as if there was nothing extraordinary about the scene before them. "What brings you all the way out here?" Jake couldn't tear his eyes from Thunder. "Is that... how did..." He struggled to form a coherent question, his expression cycling through disbelief, confusion, and awe. "That's quite a story," Melissa said, smiling at the foreman's reaction. "One we'll be happy to share back at the ranch." "What's happening there?" Jake finally managed to collect himself. "That's why I came. There's been some developments you should know about. First, news has gotten out about what you're doing. Don't know how exactly, but there's reporters calling the ranch, wanting to know about the miracle cure you're testing." Jackson frowned. "Probably Dr. Winters filed some kind of report." "That's not all," Jake continued. "Dr. Holloway from that big equine research center in Kentucky has been calling non-stop. Says he heard about Thunder from a colleague and wants to discuss a potential research partnership." "Holloway," Dr. Wilson perked up at the name. "He's one of the leading researchers in equine muscular disorders. His interest is significant." Jake nodded. "He mentioned flying in tomorrow if you're amenable to a meeting." Melissa watched her father carefully, noting the complex emotions playing across his weathered face. Wariness, pride, and something like vindication. "What are you thinking, Dad?" Jackson was quiet for a long moment before responding. "I'm thinking my grandfather would be proud to see his knowledge recognized, but cautious about who carries it forward." He turned to Dr. Wilson. "What kind of man is this Holloway? Would he respect the origins of these methods, or just see them as curiosities to be dissected in a lab?" "He has a reputation for intellectual integrity," Wilson replied thoughtfully. "And he's known for incorporating traditional knowledge into his research, particularly techniques from Native American horse culture. If anyone in mainstream veterinary science would approach this with proper respect, it would be Holloway." Thunder, seemingly aware he was the topic of discussion, approached the group and nudged Jackson's shoulder with his muzzle. The gesture held none of the weakness or hesitation that had marked his movements just days ago. Instead, it conveyed a confident affection that brought a smile to Jackson's face despite his concerns. "And there's something else," Jake added, his expression growing more serious. "The Milton Thoroughbred Farm called yesterday. Their prize stallion, Midnight Commander, has been diagnosed with early-stage PEMD. They heard rumors about Thunder and want to know if whatever you're doing could help their horse." The news landed heavily among them. Midnight Commander was a legendary racehorse whose stud fees commanded prices that even Golden Horizon couldn't match. His diagnosis with the same condition that had nearly claimed Thunder represented both a tragedy for the industry and an opportunity to prove the desert treatment's efficacy on a nationally recognized scale. "Early stage," Jackson repeated, his mind clearly racing with possibilities. "And be caught early, this treatment could potentially stop the disease in its tracks, prevent the severe deterioration Thunder experienced." Dr. Wilson nodded eagerly. "The implications are enormous. If we could document a successful preventative application of this method..." "Slow down," Melissa cautioned, ever the voice of pragmatism. "We need to complete Thunder's treatment first, satisfy Dr. Winters when she returns tomorrow, and carefully consider how we want to proceed. This knowledge isn't just a commodity to be traded." "Your daughter's right," Jackson agreed, surprising everyone, including himself. "This isn't about rushing to the next case or seeking validation from the veterinary establishment. It's about doing right by the knowledge my ancestors preserved and the horses it can help. Jake looked between them, clearly sensing he had delivered news that catalyzed significant decisions. So what do I tell folks back at the ranch? And this Dr. Holloway? Jackson exchanged looks with Melissa and Dr. Wilson before answering. Tell them we'll be returning to the ranch tomorrow evening with Thunder. Doctor. Holloway is welcome to meet us there the following day. As for the Milton farm, tell them we'll be in touch after we've had time to properly document our current case. As Jake departed with these messages, the three of them stood in contemplative silence, watching Thunder explore the perimeter of their camp with steady, confident steps that would have seemed miraculous just days ago. We're at a crossroads, Jackson finally said, voicing what they all felt. What happens next will determine whether this knowledge remains a family secret or becomes something more widely recognized and applied. Is that what you want? Melissa asked gently. To share it beyond our family? Jackson watched Thunder for a long moment before responding. What I want is for horses to be healed when modern medicine says they can't be. What I want is for this wisdom not to die with me, as it nearly died with my grandfather. He turned to his daughter with unexpected vulnerability in his eyes. But I need to know it will be carried forward with the right spirit, the right intentions. Then we create a framework for that, Melissa said, her business mind already formulating structures and safeguards. A foundation that preserves not just the techniques, but the philosophy behind them. Research that respects origins and context. Training that passes on the intuitive elements alongside the practical ones. Dr. Wilson, who had been listening intently, added his perspective. The veterinary community is more open to integrative approaches than it was even 5 years ago. There's growing recognition that traditional knowledge often contains wisdom that science is only beginning to understand. The timing might be right for this bridge you're envisioning. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the desert floor, they spent hours discussing possibilities, challenges, and visions for the future. Thunder moved among them occasionally, his improving condition a living testament to the power of the knowledge they were considering how to share. That evening, as they sat around the campfire for what would likely be their last night in the desert, Melissa found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past week. They had arrived desperate and divided. Her father, clinging to ancient wisdom, she skeptical and fearful, Dr. Wilson representing the medical establishment's dismissal of traditional knowledge. Now they sat united in purpose, forever changed by what they had witnessed. You know, she said softly, watching the flames dance, when we first came out here, I thought I was humoring you, Dad, making sure you didn't do anything foolish in your grief over Thunder. I never actually believed. I know, Jackson replied without recrimination. Faith is harder to maintain in a world that demands proof for everything. Yet here we are, Dr. Wilson observed, with proof so compelling it's forced all of us to reconsider our certainties. Thunder, standing nearby at the edge of the firelight, nickered softly as if in agreement. His silhouette against the star-filled sky was strong and proud once more, not yet fully restored to his former magnificence, but unmistakably on that path. As they prepared for their final night in the desert, each felt the weight of the threshold they were crossing. Tomorrow would bring Dr. Winters, the return to the ranch, and the beginning of whatever new chapter would emerge from this remarkable experience. The desert had offered its healing not just to Thunder, but to all of them, mending rifts between father and daughter, between traditional wisdom and modern science, between despair and hope. The morning of their final day in the desert brought a crystalline clarity to the air, as if the land itself was offering one last perfect moment before their departure. Thunder greeted the dawn with a spirited display, trotting, cantering, and even managing a brief gallop across the sandy expanse near their camp. His movement still lacked some of the fluid power that had once defined him, but the transformation from the dying animal they had brought here was nothing short of extraordinary. Jackson watched with quiet satisfaction. His weathered face relaxed in a way Melissa hadn't seen in months. "He's ready," he said simply when she joined him. "Ready to go home, ready to continue his recovery on his own terms." "Doctor." Wilson approached with his medical kit, preparing for one final examination before Dr. Winters arrived. "I've been thinking about what parameters to measure for the formal documentation," he said, his tone reflecting the scientist who had re-emerged alongside the newly respectful traditionalist. "We need quantifiable metrics to demonstrate his improvement, not just subjective observations." "Measure what you need to," Jackson agreed with unexpected openness. "But remember that some aspects of healing can't be captured in numbers or charts." The veterinarian nodded, acknowledging this truth that would have seemed like evasive mysticism to him just days ago. As he conducted his examination, he dictated notes into a small recorder. Subject shows approximately 70% restoration of normal muscle function, compared to less than 15% upon arrival. Tremors have resolved almost completely. Gait analysis shows near-normal stride pattern at walk and trot, with minor asymmetry remaining at canter. The sound of an approaching vehicle interrupted his clinical assessment. "Doctor." Winter's white SUV appeared on the horizon, right on schedule. "Moment of truth," Melissa murmured, moving to stand beside her father as they watched the vehicle draw nearer. Dr. Winters emerged from her SUV with the same authoritative bearing she had displayed on her previous visit, clipboard in hand and expression professionally neutral. That neutrality faltered, however, when Thunder trotted over to greet her, a gesture that would have been physically impossible when she had last seen him. "Dr. Wilson," she acknowledged, her eyes never leaving the stallion. "Your daily reports indicated improvement, but this is..." She trailed off, searching for appropriately professional terminology. "Remarkable, unprecedented, miraculous," Dr. Wilson supplied with a hint of satisfaction. "I've documented everything meticulously, if you'd like to review the data." Dr. Winters approached Thunder cautiously, her trained eyes assessing his condition with skeptical precision. "May I?" she asked Jackson, who nodded permission for her examination. For several minutes, she checked Thunder's vital signs, muscle responses, and overall condition, her expression gradually shifting from professional doubt to undeniable amazement. According to established veterinary knowledge, this level of recovery from advanced PEMD is impossible, Jackson suggested with a slight smile. "Undocumented," she corrected diplomatically. "Until now, apparently." She straightened, brushing sand from her knees as she turned to face them fully. "Mr. Harrington, I came here prepared to enforce regulations regarding proper animal care. Instead, I find myself witnessing what could potentially be a significant breakthrough in equine medicine." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "The department would be very interested in a formal report on this treatment protocol." "We'd be happy to provide one," Melissa interjected before her father could respond. "Under certain conditions that preserve the integrity of the traditional knowledge involved." "Doctor." Winters raised an eyebrow but nodded. "That seems reasonable. The important thing is that this horse is clearly no longer in distress and is, in fact, showing remarkable improvement." She made several notes on her clipboard before continuing. "I'll be closing the investigation with a finding of no animal welfare violations, and I'd like to personally follow up on Thunder's continued recovery, if you're amenable." We're expecting to host Dr. Holloway from the Kentucky Equine Research Center tomorrow, Dr. Wilson informed her. Perhaps you'd like to join that meeting as well. A collaborative approach might be beneficial. As they discussed logistics for transporting Thunder home and the upcoming meeting, Melissa noticed her father had stepped away from the conversation. She found him kneeling in the sand a short distance away, carefully collecting samples into small cloth bags. For the next horse who needs healing," he explained without looking up. "This specific sand, with its mineral content, it's part of what makes the treatment effective." Melissa knelt beside him, taking one of the bags and helping to fill it. "We could have it analyzed," she suggested, "understand exactly what makes it special." "We could," Jackson agreed. "But knowing its composition isn't the same as understanding its spirit." He looked up at the vast desert landscape surrounding them. "This place has power that can't be reduced to chemical formulas." "Maybe it's both," Melissa offered. "Maybe understanding the science doesn't diminish the spirit, but gives us another way to appreciate it." Jackson considered this, his hands still working methodically to gather the healing sand. "Your grandfather would have liked that perspective," he finally said. "He always said wisdom comes from holding seemingly opposite truths at the same time." By early afternoon, they had broken camp and loaded their supplies into the vehicles. Thunder stood patiently by the horse trailer, his improved condition evident in his alert posture and bright eyes. When Jackson led him up the ramp, the stallion entered without hesitation, a far cry from the struggling, pain-racked animal they had transported here less than a week ago. Before departing, Jackson walked a short distance into the desert alone. Melissa watched from a respectful distance as her father knelt once more, placing his hand flat against the sand in what appeared to be a gesture of gratitude. The moment was private, almost sacred, a communion between a man and the land that had answered his desperate faith with healing. The journey back to Golden Horizon Ranch passed with a mixture of exhaustion and anticipation. Thunder traveled more comfortably than on their outbound trip, occasionally nickering at the familiar scents as they approached home territory. When they finally turned onto the long driveway leading to the ranch, Melissa was surprised to see several vehicles parked near the main stable. "Word has spread," Dr. Wilson observed from the passenger seat of Jackson's truck. "Looks like you have a welcoming committee." Indeed, as they pulled up to the stable yard, a small crowd had gathered. Ranch hands, neighbors, even a reporter from the local paper. Jake had clearly been keeping watch for their arrival and quickly took charge of the situation, directing the ranch hands to help with unloading while politely but firmly keeping the onlookers at a distance. "Give them space, folks," he called out. "Horse needs rest after his journey." "There'll be time for questions later." When Jackson lowered the trailer ramp and led Thunder out into the familiar surroundings of his home stable, a collective gasp rose from those watching. The stallion stepped confidently onto home ground, head high, surveying his domain with the regal bearing that had once been his signature. Someone began to applaud, and soon the sounds spread through the small crowd, a spontaneous recognition of the miracle they were witnessing. "Mr. Harrington," called the reporter, pushing forward despite Jake's attempts to maintain order. "Is it true you used an ancient Native American sand treatment to cure an incurable disease? Will you be sharing this method with the wider equine community?" Jackson, typically taciturn with the press, surprised Melissa by responding directly. "What you're seeing is the result of traditional knowledge that my family has preserved for generations, combined with careful veterinary monitoring," he said, nodding toward Dr. Wilson. "And yes, we intend to share it responsibly, respectfully, and with proper attribution to its origins." As they settled Thunder into his familiar stall, now modified with the special sand Jackson had collected, Melissa noticed Dr. Wilson deep in conversation with her father. The two men, one representing modern veterinary science, the other traditional healing wisdom, were bent over a notebook, comparing observations and insights with mutual respect that would have seemed impossible a week ago. Later that evening, after the visitors had departed and Thunder was resting comfortably under the watchful eye of the night stable hand, Melissa found her father sitting on the porch of the main house, gazing out at the distant mountains where their desert healing ground lay. "I've been thinking about next steps," she said, settling into the chair beside him. "What if we established a foundation, the Harrington Traditional Equine Healing Foundation? We could document these methods properly, conduct research studies, train practitioners who understand both the technical aspects and the spiritual dimensions." Jackson considered this, slowly nodding. "Your grandfather would approve. He always said knowledge dies if it's hoarded, but can be corrupted if it's carelessly shared." "We'll be careful," Melissa promised. "We'll create protocols, ethical guidelines. The foundation will maintain the integrity of the traditions while building bridges to modern veterinary practice." "And you would run this foundation?" Jackson asked, studying his daughter's face in the fading light. "With your guidance," she replied. "I have the business experience to structure it properly, but you have the knowledge that gives it purpose. We'd be partners." The word hung between them, weighted with significance beyond this specific proposal. Partners, not just father and daughter, not just business associates, but true collaborators bringing complementary strengths to a shared vision. Jackson extended his hand, and Melissa took it, feeling the calluses earned through decades of working the land and caring for horses. No words were needed to seal their agreement. The gesture itself was enough. The following morning brought Dr. Holloway from Kentucky, a distinguished man in his 60s with kind eyes, behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a reputation as one of the nation's foremost equine researchers. Dr. Winters joined them as promised, along with two associates from the University Veterinary Program in Reno. They gathered in the ranch's conference room, where Melissa had prepared a presentation outlining Thunder's case history, the desert treatment protocol, and their vision for the foundation. As she spoke, she could see the skepticism in some faces gradually giving way to genuine interest. "What you're proposing," Dr. Holloway said when she concluded, "represents a potentially groundbreaking approach to PEMD, and possibly other equine muscular disorders. The integration of traditional methods with modern documentation and assessment." He shook his head in admiration. "It's exactly the kind of bridge building the veterinary community needs. But the proof is in the results," Dr. Winters added pragmatically. "I think it's time we examined the patient." They moved as a group to the stable where Thunder was housed. When Jackson opened the stall door, the stallion emerged with a presence that commanded attention. Head high, eyes bright, movements fluid and purposeful. Dr. Holloway watched intently as Thunder demonstrated walking, trotting, and even a controlled canter in the small paddock adjacent to the stable. "Extraordinary," the researcher murmured, making notes as Dr. Wilson provided a detailed account of Thunder's progression. "And you say he was unable to stand unassisted just 7 days ago? Recommended for euthanasia," Dr. Wilson confirmed. "His condition was deemed terminal by myself and 2 consulting specialists." After a thorough examination, during which Thunder cooperated with unusual patience, Dr. Holloway straightened with an expression of decided enthusiasm. "Mr. Harrington, Ms. Harrington, I believe what you've accomplished here merits not just documentation, but a comprehensive research initiative. My center would be honored to collaborate with your foundation to study these methods systematically." The conversation that followed laid the groundwork for what would eventually become a pioneering research partnership, combining the Harrington family's traditional knowledge with the scientific resources of the Kentucky Equine Research Center. By day's end, preliminary agreements were in place, research protocols were being drafted, and the first steps toward formal documentation of the desert sand treatment were underway. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Melissa stood at the fence of Golden Horizon's main training paddock, watching Thunder with undisguised pride. The stallion moved with all his former power and grace, his coat gleaming with health as he effortlessly cleared a series of jumps under the guidance of their head trainer. "Hard to believe he was at death's door half a year ago," said Dr. Wilson, joining her at the fence. Now a regular consultant for the Harrington Foundation, he had become an unexpected ally in their work to bridge traditional and modern approaches to equine medicine. "Sometimes I still can't believe it myself," Melissa admitted. "Then I remember those nights in the desert, watching Dad work with such certainty, such faith. Faith based on generations of observation and practice," Wilson noted. "Not blind faith, but knowledge passed down and refined through experience." They watched as Jackson entered the paddock, Thunder immediately trotting over to greet him with affectionate recognition. The bond between them had only deepened through their shared journey of healing. "The Midnight Commander case is going well," Wilson mentioned, referring to the thoroughbred farm that had sought their help. "Early intervention with the sand treatment has halted progression of his PEMD completely. The research team is documenting everything meticulously." Melissa nodded, satisfaction warming her despite the autumn chill. In the months since their desert experience, the foundation she had envisioned had become reality, with a growing team of veterinarians and traditional practitioners working together to document, study, and apply the healing methods her family had preserved. "3 more cases have been referred to us this week alone," she said. "Word is spreading faster than we anticipated." Jackson released Thunder to run free in the paddock, the stallion immediately breaking into a joyful gallop that displayed his fully restored strength and vitality. As he reached the far end of the enclosure, he suddenly raised his head, ears pricked forward intently. In the distance, barely visible against the backdrop of the mountains, a small band of wild horses moved across the landscape, perhaps the same herd they had encountered in the desert. Thunder watched them, utterly still for a moment, before responding with a powerful whinny that carried across the ranch like a declaration. "He remembers," Jackson said, joining them at the fence. "Not just who he was, but who he is, part domestic, part wild, carrying ancient wisdom in his blood, just as we carry it in our traditions." As Thunder resumed his exuberant movement around the paddock, Melissa reflected on the transformation that had occurred not just in the stallion, but in all of them. Her father had gained a new openness to sharing the knowledge he had guarded so carefully. Dr. Wilson had discovered respect for healing approaches outside his scientific training, and she herself had found a purpose that transcended balance sheets and business strategies, a calling to preserve wisdom that bridged past and future, tradition and innovation, faith and science. The desert had offered more than just healing sand. It had provided a crucible for transformation, a place where desperate hope had given way to proven possibility, where an old horse buried in sand had risen to run once more, and where a family legacy had found new life in the most unexpected of ways. Thunder galloped past them, mane and tail flying, every powerful stride a testament to the healing that had seemed impossible just months ago. In his renewed vitality, Melissa saw the promise of their foundation's work, not just for horses, but for the human understanding of healing itself, expanded to embrace knowledge from all sources, traditional and modern alike. "And some miracles," Jackson said softly, watching his beloved stallion run. "Come not from heaven, but from the earth beneath our feet, if we remember how to listen." And in that moment, with thunder racing against the backdrop of mountains where his healing began, with the foundation's work already touching horses across the country. With father and daughter standing united in purpose, the desert's ancient wisdom and healing power seemed to echo across the generations. A legacy preserved, renewed, and now poised to help countless horses once deemed beyond saving. Thunder slowed his gallop, circling back to approach them at the fence. He stopped before Jackson, lowering his proud head to press his forehead against the old horseman's chest in a gesture of profound connection. Man and horse remained that way for a long moment, communicating in a language older than words, while the wild herd on the distant horizon continued their eternal journey across the Nevada desert that had given them all a second chance.